podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Welcome to the Two-Footed Podcast, your daily dive into the biggest stories and talking points from the world of football, with a particular focus on the Premier League. Before we get started, a quick shout out to our presenting sponsor, Liberty Shield. Liberty Shield is a VPN provider, and one of the many benefits of their service is that you can change your IP address to unlock geo-restricted content. And for Premier League fans like us, that means you can catch all the action no matter where you are. So if you use the UK VPN, that means you get all live matches on Sky Sports, TNT Sport, Amazon Prime, and the highlights with Match of the Day on BBC iPlayer. Furthermore, you can switch your location to the USA to access all those matches you may otherwise miss using American streaming services like Peacock and USA Network. If you sign up now, you can get 25% off by using the code EPL25OFF. That's EPL25 off at checkout for 25% off. That's whether you choose their VPN router or the software app for your favorite devices. Liberty Shield have got you covered. Oh, and don't forget, after today's episode, be sure to check out our shorter bite-sized pod, the Two-Footed Extra. That will keep you up to speed with all the latest news and gossip. And be sure to check out the other shows that EPL Index offers. Today was hugely enjoyable, a tad predictable, previewing every Premier League round with a different guest each week, where he really does put them through the ringer. You come off that show, I've guested on that show, you come off it, and you feel like you've been interrogated. It's a really good listen, though. There's also our new show, our roundup show. It's called The Final Whistle. It's hosted by Nina Kauser and Ben Poscod, and they summarise all the matches and the big talking points. It comes out every Sunday evening, so make sure you're listening. Now, let's dive in to today's biggest stories. What's good, boys and girls? Two-Footed Podcast. Today is Thursday. It is the 10th of October. I hope you're all well, having yourselves pleasant days. Very cold overnight. The car actually froze overnight, which is the first time this year. But we got a lovely sunny day today, which is quite delightful. Something warm. It's precise and sunny, so that's good. It's bright. It's good for the mood. Makes you feel chipper. I feel chipper today. We're going to start by not doing something chipper. We're going to talk about the Nations League, because obviously that's what's going on at the moment. So, in Nations League A, we have 4 groups, and Nations League B also has 4 groups. Nations League C also 4 groups. So let's go through and see what games we have this week, what we can look forward to, or what we can ignore. So in League A, Group 1, we get Croatia versus Scotland and Poland versus Portugal. Both of those games are on Saturday. So as things currently stand, Portugal top the group with 6 points. They have beaten Croatia and Scotland. Croatia are second with a win over Poland, defeat to Croatia, obviously. Poland third, win over Scotland, defeat to Croatia. And then Scotland are bottom. Croatia ahead, I assume based on alphabetical order. Oh, no, it's the head-to-head. It's based on head-to-head. So that's what it is. So yeah, they are playing on Saturday. There is another round of games next week. We can talk about them next week. In Group 2, it is Israel versus France and Italy versus Belgium. Those games are on today. So, Italy currently top. They've beaten France and Israel. France are second. They've beaten Belgium. Belgium are third. They've beaten Israel. And Israel are bottom. You would expect Israel to lose to France. The game has been played in Budapest. And I would expect Italy to beat Belgium. That would be my expectation in those games. My expectation in the Group 1 games are Croatia to beat Scotland and Portugal to beat Poland. In Group 3, it is Bosnia-Herzegovina versus Germany and Hungary versus Netherlands. Those games are tomorrow. They're on Friday. Germany currently top with 4 points. They have beaten Hungary and drawn with the Netherlands. The Netherlands are second. They've beaten Bosnia and obviously drawn with the Germans. Bosnia are third. They've drawn with Hungary, and Hungary are bottom. They've drawn with Bosnia. They both lost the other game, obviously. And what separates these teams, again, is the head-to-head, the overall goal difference. Germany are +5. The Netherlands are +3. Bosnia are -3 and Hungary are -5. I would expect Germany to beat Bosnia. I would expect the Netherlands to beat Hungary. I think the best chance either Bosnia or Hungary have is beating each other, and that game takes place later on. We do they obviously played in the last one. They're going to play again. We have games tomorrow night, like I say, and then games on Monday, which is quite the quick turnaround. In Group 4, it is Serbia versus Switzerland, Spain versus Denmark. Denmark are currently top. They've beaten both Switzerland and Serbia. Spain are next. They drew with Serbia, but then hammered Switzerland. Then it's Serbia because they got the draw with Spain, and Switzerland have no points. Serbia-Switzerland is interesting. I would expect Serbia to win at home, but you just don't know with the Swiss. They only tend to turn up really in major tournaments, but every so often in nonsense like this Nations League, they will throw in a big performance. But I'll still back the Serbs to win, and I think Spain will beat Denmark. That is Saturday. Their second game is on Wednesday. That is how we stand for Group A, or Nations League A, I should say. Nations League B then. Tomorrow, Czech Republic versus Albania, Ukraine versus Georgia. Georgia are top, Albania second, Czech Republic third. It is goal difference separating them, and Ukraine currently bottom. Group 2 sees England host Greece and Finland host Ireland. Greece and England both have their 6 points. Ireland and Finland have no points. So this is a big game for Ireland. This is a very, very important game for Ireland. But I think now is a good time to just take a quick pause and mention that we got horrible news yesterday that George Baldock had passed away, the Greek international who spent most of his career playing in the UK, was of course born in the UK, came through the MK Dons Academy, was with them until 2017 and joined Sheffield Wednesday. And he played for Sheffield Wednesday from 2017 right up until the end of last season, 219 games in total, before joining Panathinaikos. He signed a 3-year contract at the end of last season. He had played 4 games for them, and he was found unresponsive in the swimming pool of his house at the age of just 31. His wife had been trying to reach him. She was unable to get in contact. She raised concern. The property owner visited the property and discovered his body. An initial coroner's report suggested that he had drowned, and police ruled out any criminal activity. However, further details of his death remain unknown, and may well remain unknown out of respect for the family's privacy. At least it appears that there has been no foul play. It is just a tragic accident, but it's a heartbreaking accident. George Baldock's only 31 years of age. 31 years of age, you're no age at that point. You're only really getting started. And it's such a shame. It's such a shame. thoughts with everybody connected to George Baldock and how tough it's going to be for the Greece team to play. They're playing today, having just gotten this news. In Group 3, it is Austria, Kazakhstan, Norway, Slovenia. Again, both games today. Slovenia and Norway have 4 points. Austria, Kazakhstan have 1 each. Finally, then in Group 4, Iceland take on Wales, Turkey take on Montenegro. Those games are tomorrow. Turkey and Wales have 4 points so far. Iceland have 3. Montenegro do not have any points. League C. Group 1, Estonia versus Azerbaijan, Slovakia versus Sweden. The Swedes really should walk through this and get promoted. It'd be tough to see them not getting promoted out of Group C, considering who they've been up against. Slovakia are probably the best team they're going to face, and they're in the same group, so they'll be put into either directly promoted or put into the playoffs. I can't remember what I was going to say now. Oh, yeah. Sorry, we'll move on to Group 2. It is Lithuania, Kosovo, Cyprus, Romania. That is on Saturday. Romania have 6 points. Kosovo and Cyprus 3 each, and Lithuania have none. In Group 3, Bulgaria, Luxembourg, Belarus, Northern Ireland. Belarus have 4 points, as do Bulgaria. Northern Ireland have 3, and Luxembourg have no points. And then finally, in Group 4, it's Latvia against North Macedonia, and the Faroe Islands against Armenia. North Macedonia top with 4 points. Armenia and Latvia have 3, and the Faroe Islands have no points. So there we go. Right, I will be back after the break. We're going to have listeners' questions. I think I have 3. So that's going to be the show. So it's probably going to be a short one, which actually times well for me because I've got other stuff to record today. But I'll be back after this one. Right, welcome back. So, AMK2889. Recently, you talked about a poll question regarding what is more impressive between Arsenal's unbeaten season and City's treble. Would you still feel Arsenal's unbeaten season is more impressive than United's treble? Of all the trebles that have been achieved, which one do you think is the most impressive? I think the United treble is the most impressive because it wasn't something that was common then. And I think it's harder to do the treble in England than it is elsewhere, because I think clubs take the FA Cup more seriously than they do the Coppa Italia or the Coppa del Rey or the French Cup or the Pokal. I think it is tougher to win the FA Cup. But it was much tougher to win the FA Cup in '99 than it is now. Like, a lot of clubs don't take the FA Cup all that seriously now up until the later rounds. It's very much a rotation competition. Wasn't the case really when United won it in '99. I also feel like the standard of opposition United went up against was higher than most teams have had to go through. So I would say United's treble is the most impressive. Is it more impressive than Arsenal's unbeaten run or unbeaten league season? Arsenal are the only team to have done that in the Premier League. Now, other teams have done it in other leagues. Obviously, we saw Bayer Leverkusen do it last year in the Bundesliga. But I think it's tougher to do in the Premier League. And if you look at that era, there was a lot of good teams in the Premier League. But I don't think it's more impressive than United's treble. Like, I think that United treble is genuinely, and I hated every moment of it at the time. I think it's absolutely out on its own. Like, in terms of the league, that Arsenal team would rank above United, because in the league, while United did win the league, they didn't win it in nearly as impressive fashion. They took 79 points. Only won the title, remember, by 1 point from Arsenal. Arsenal were so close to doing the double that year. And people forget that Arsenal should have beaten United in the FA Cup semi-final when they played them in the replay at Villa Park and Bergkamp misses the penalty. They should have beaten Arsenal in that replay. Arsenal should have beaten United in that replay, and Arsenal would have gone on to beat Newcastle in the final. Arsenal finished a point off United in the league. Like, it's a ludicrous thing. But United did go unbeaten in the league from December. They lost on the 19th of December away to Middlesbrough. That was the fourth of 4 games that they failed to win. They drew away to Villa, away to Tottenham, home to Chelsea, and then lost at home to Middlesbrough and didn't lose again. Now, United will argue, and probably correctly, that in their last 9 games, they only won 4 of them. So they did slow up at the end. And I suppose that does give the impression that maybe it was a bit closer in the league than it kind of seems with 1 point of a difference. I'll just check. I don't remember off the top of my head how Arsenal finished that season. Let's see. Premier League. Like, to be fair, Arsenal lose to Aston Villa on the 13th of December. That's the 5th of 5 games that they don't win. A draw with Spurs, a defeat at Wimbledon, a draw with Middlesbrough, a draw with Derby, and a defeat at Villa. And they don't lose again up until Leeds on the second to last day of the season. So if they had beaten Leeds, maybe they do win the title. Like, maybe they do. Because, yeah, they were closing the gap on United. We get right to the second to last game. They're level going into the second to last game because United have stumbled a bit. If they beat Leeds, they win the league. So, yeah, Arsenal could and maybe should have won the double that year. They did close up a lot of ground on United. Fair play. Like, Arsenal were 6th after 17 games. That 17th game is that defeat away to Villa. They were 6th when they lost that game. From match week 7 onwards, United were in the top 4 the whole time. Arsenal did take ownership of top spot with a few weeks left in the season. Like, they had the superior goal difference, and United managed to jump them in the last 2 games because Arsenal lost a game, and then Arsenal only won their last game 1-0, whereas United drew 0-0 and then won 2-1. So they got a +1 bump. Arsenal got no bump. And that put United ahead on goal difference. Arsenal... United scored a lot more goals. Arsenal only conceded 17 goals that year. 17 goals is a hell of an achievement. Anyways, this is irrelevant. The United treble is more impressive. It is. Like, it's more impressive. Look at that league. That's a strong Premier League. The FA Cup run, very, very impressive. Beat Middlesbrough, beat Liverpool, Fulham, Chelsea, then Arsenal. Needed replays to beat Chelsea and Arsenal, and they beat Newcastle. And Newcastle were decent. Like, it's not like Newcastle were a bad team. They may well have gone on to win the League Cup that year as well, because they lost to Tottenham, and Tottenham went on and won it. So they could have done the quadruple had they beaten Tottenham. So Spurs beat them. If they'd won that game, they would have been in the semi-finals. they would have played Wimbledon, they would have beaten Wimbledon, and then they would have played Leicester City in the final. And they would have won that as well. And then you look at the Champions League run, like they're in a group with Barcelona and Bayern Munich, and they get out of it. Then they knock out Inter, a really good Inter team, a great Juve team, and then they play Bayern again. Like, no easy fixtures there. Like, the easiest games they had were in the group stage, and they played Brøndby. They beat them twice. They drew both games against Bayern and both games against Barca in the group stage, if you don't remember. There's a couple of belting games in that run. The two games against Barcelona were phenomenal. Like, really, really high caliber football. The two games against Bayern in the group stage were good, not as good as the Barca ones. And then, you look through the knockout run. They beat Inter at home, draw away, draw at home with Juve, beat them away after going behind, and then they beat Bayern the way they did. Like, they didn't lose. They didn't lose a single game in the European Cup that year. That's more impressive. Like, that is more impressive. And I hated every single minute of it. What a team, though. Schmeichel, Neville, Ronnie Johnson, Jaap Stam, Dennis Irwin, Beckham, Scholes, Keane, Giggs, York, Cole. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And then you look at the squad. Nicky Butt, quality. Jesper Blomqvist, quality. Phil Neville, decent. Wes Brown, very promising. Henning Berg, solid. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, pest. Teddy Sheringham, quality. David May, reliable. John Curtis, reliable. Jordi Cruyff, his surname's Cruyff. That's about the only thing I could say about him. Like, it was a small squad. It wasn't this huge, big squad of players that did this for them. If you look at the appearances that season, Jordi Cruyff played 10 times, okay? Wes Brown, Teddy Sheringham, Henning Berg, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, Ronnie Johnson, Jesper Blomqvist, Ryan Giggs, Neville, Butt, Irwin, Cole, Scholes, Stam, York, the other Neville, Keane, Beckham, and Schmeichel. That's 16, 17 players. Really, you're relying on 17 players and you go and you win that many games? It's incredible. I think they played 63 games that season. And they had 17 players that played more than 10 times. Yeah, it's them. Right, Isaac Gilding. If you were to rank all the current players in the Premier League based on overall ability, starting at the top with the likes of Van Dijk, Rodri, Salah, KDB, working down to the worst players, maybe ending with James Milner, which two or three players are slap bang in the middle? Who is the literal average Premier League player? Do you know, it's funny you asked this, because I thought about this recently. Because, like, I always kind of looked at James Milner and thought that is just a bang average, middle-of-the-road footballer. Based on ability, skill, the whole shebang. A bang average footballer who's had a very good career, but he's had that career largely on the back of his fitness and willingness to work hard and the ability of other players. If you're not aware, James Milner has lost every single final he's ever started and wasn't first choice in any team that won anything that he played in. So now, who is the epitome of the bang average player? And I kind of thought, is it Solly March? Is Solly March the average Premier League player? So let's take right wingers as an example, right? So the best right winger in the Premier League is Mohamed Salah. Okay, and then you've got your high-end ones like your Bukayo Sakas that sit right up there at the very peak. And then you've got the lesser ones. And I would say Wes Burns, of all starting right wingers in the Premier League, Wes Burns is probably the worst of them. Now, it's not to disparage the fella, but of the starting right wingers in the league, he is the worst of them. Like, go through them. Salah, Silva, Saka, Madeki, Bailey, Minta, Gordon, Adama, Brennan Johnson, Elanga, Mbomo, Bowen, Semenyo, Garnacho, Fatu, Dwight McNeil, Burns, Ishmael Assar, or Eddie Nketiah, whoever you want to say, Dibbling, and I don't know who you'd say is the Wolves one. Let's say Bellegarde. I think Burns is the worst of those. So you're looking at someone that's kind of slap in the middle between Wes Burns and Mo Salah. And I think that is probably in that position, it's probably Solly March. He's not the starter, obviously, but I'm just thinking ability-wise. He's probably about in the middle of those two. But I do think when you look at other positions, Solly March would be above average. You know, so I do think it varies position to position. But Solly March is the one that did kind of stand out to me. Like, is he closer to the high end, closer to the low end? Might probably a little bit closer to the low end than the high end, but I kind of feel like Solly March is about average. And he's he's a good player, don't get me wrong. And Wes Burns is a fine player. Like, when you're playing at the Premier League level, to be the worst player in the Premier League, you have to be really good at football. So it's not disparaging to him. It just is what it is. So yeah, I would say Solly March is probably for that position. But then it's probably higher in some positions, like goalkeeper. But if we start factoring in backups, then it becomes very weird and becomes quite hard to calculate. I'm not sure Jason Steele isn't the worst goalkeeper in the league, including all backups. So if he's the worst and Alisson's the best, the guy in the middle is probably the worst starter. So is that how you function it? Like, is Wes Burns then the average Premier League player? Well, I would say no, because I think there's clubs that have two right wingers that are better than him. Do you know what I mean? Whereas you look at the goalkeeping position, the worst starting goalkeeper in the league, I mean, I'm inclined to say it might be Mark Flecken or Muric at Ipswich. I think it's one of those two. Kepa's better than them. But then you factor in backups. I think Queven Keller is better than both of them. So is he the average goalkeeper? If he's the 18th or 19th or 20th best goalkeeper in the league, is he better than others? Maybe. It's quite hard to really figure out who the average Premier League player is. I think it's probably more wide-ranging than just a clear path. But you did also ask who's the most perfectly average Premier League player of all time. Are they better or worse than the average player currently? I think the most average player of all time is James Milner. I do. I think he's the most average player of all time. I think he's literally a 6 out of 10 at his best. I think that's James Milner is just 6 out of 10. And he's 6 out of 10 across the board. think it's probably him. I do. I think James Milner is probably the most perfectly average footballer in Premier League history. I just think because he works really hard, and he's been very fortunate not to have significant injuries through his career. He's had great longevity. But people will mistake that longevity for him being a great player because that's what people do, you know? We'll go to break. We'll come back with our last question for today. Right, welcome back. So, final question for today is from Phil Walker, and it is, most people hate international breaks, especially having 3 in quick succession in September, October, and November. I have an idea to do the following. Make it 2 breaks. Have a break at the beginning of October and then keep the November break as is. So basically split the difference between the September one and the October one, put it in the middle. Each country plays 3 games in each international break, which makes up the 6 they currently play across. But they're only allowed to play a player no more than 2 of those games. Benefits are it gives extra 2 weeks flex in the calendar for players and clubs to fulfill fixtures, forces countries to try new players and blood them in, it placates fans and clubs. What do you think of this? I think it's brilliant. I genuinely do think that's one of the best ideas I've seen, especially if you're going to limit, like, so right now we play 6 games, so Phil is keeping the 6 games. The games would be played in probably quicker succession. So on this international break, for example, maybe they would have played Wednesday, Saturday, and then Wednesday, and then they come back to their clubs, as opposed to having the week's training Saturday, Wednesday, or whatever the case may be. But if the players can only play in 4 of the games across the international breaks, then they're not going to be any more, because realistically, teams are going to play them in 2 in each. You're not going to get a player that plays 3 in one and 1 in the other. So they're not going to play any more than they do on the current international breaks. You might get a player who plays a bit later in the break than they would have with the current system. But alternatively, you might get players that play the Wednesday, the Saturday, and then don't play the 3rd game, so have that week of recovery. And I would say you keep them with their national team. You don't send them back after if they've played the first 2 games, you don't send them back to their club. You keep them with the national team so they continue to train and whatever, but it's a reduced load. As Phil said, you get countries being forced to try new players. It's more opportunities for younger players. You simply expand the squads that they can pick from whatever it is now, 26 to say, I don't know, 37, 38, maybe even 40. Maybe let them take 40 players. And yes, it will mean that some players who aren't necessarily good enough do get called up from time to time. But it might also be that you get players that are just much better at international level than they are at club level. Look at Peter Crouch, for example. Peter Crouch is a much better international player than he ever was at club level. If we take England as an example of this, what their squad would look like. So they initially called up 24 players. 3 withdrew and they called up 2 more. So now England have a squad of 23 players. But if we look at players that were also called up in the last 12 months, you've got Aaron Ramsdale, James Trafford, and Sam Johnstone. Now, I think Sam Johnstone would have been ruled out of this break anyway. That's still 2 other goalkeepers they could have called up to go with Pickford, Pope, and Henderson. Defenders who have been called up in the last 12 months but are currently either injured or, in one case, retired from international football. Esme Konsa is injured. Kieran Trippier is retired. Harry Maguire, Luke Shaw, Joe Gomez, Lewis Dunk, Jared Branthwaite, Gerald Quansah, Ben Chilwell, and Fikayo Tomori. None of them are in this current England squad, all of whom have been in England squads over the last 12 months for Branthwaite and Quansah. It was the squad for the Euros, the pre-squad. And it would give an opportunity to younger defenders like that. Like, it could give Jarrell Quansah the chance to get his debut. It would give Jared Branthwaite the chance to get his debut. He has made his debut, hasn't he? But it would give him the chance to get another cap under his belt and keep the momentum, because he's just back from injury. So you get him still training, still playing, and it would probably help his club team. In midfield, obviously, Mainoo's injured, Gibbs White is injured. Wharton is injured, but wasn't actually called up regardless. He was called up to the 21 squad and dropped out. Maddison is not in this squad. Calvin Phillips is not in the squad. Now, you don't necessarily have to be calling him up. Jordan Henderson the same. You're not going to want to call them all up, but it just gives you more opportunities. Like, you look at the 21 squad, there's definitely players who were called up to the 21s that are worth a crack at senior level. Just to see, like Morgan Rogers as an example, with the way he's playing in the Premier League right now, why couldn't he be added to the England senior squad? Bowen, Eze, Tony, Rashford, Wilson, and Nketiah. Now, Wilson is injured, but none of the rest of them were called up to this squad. We know they're all good enough to play for England. We know they're all good enough. So why couldn't you add them to the mix? Why couldn't Harvey Barnes get an opportunity? Morgan Rogers. There's a lot of good English players. Noni Mudeki. Noni Mudeki's 22, by the way. So he's ready for an opportunity. Callum Hudson-Odoi's playing really well. Why not get him involved and see how he does? Because what's the harm on it? In the Nations League, that's what this really should be. It should be a proving ground. You should be giving players the chance to prove that they're good enough to play at the international level, and give managers more options when it gets time for a major tournament. So they're not just looking at the same pool of 30 players and saying, right, this is what I've got. Instead, they've got a pool of maybe 50 players over a 2-year window that make cases. And now a manager has much more choices. And people will say, oh yeah, but you don't go in with the same type of settled team. Let's take a look at the last World Cup, shall we? Let's just take a quick look at the last World Cup, where Argentina went in with a settled team. They had a settled team going into that World Cup. And in their opening match, they lost. In pretty embarrassing fashion. They lost to Saudi Arabia. So their settled team going into that game, Martinez in goal, Molina, Romero, Otamendi, Tagliafico. Midfield of Rodrigo de Paul, Leandro Paredes, Angel Di Maria on the right, Papu Gomes off the left, who, remember, had to be called up because Lo Celso got hurt. So the settled team was thrown off straight away. And up front, Lionel Messi and Lautaro Martinez. And they lost. That team went on to play in the World Cup final. You still had Martinez. You still had Molina, Romero, Otamendi, and Tagliafico. But in midfield, you now have Alexis McAllister. You now have Enzo Fernandez. They weren't in the settled team. But Argentina would not have won the World Cup without those two coming along and those two getting opportunities. And up front, Lionel Messi with Julian Alvarez, not with Lautaro Martinez. So you've got 3 massive changes to their starting 11 from the first game to the final. 3 massive changes that would not have happened had they just been focused in on the settled team nonsense. They would not win that World Cup without those changes. Alvarez, Enzo, and McAllister were so important to that World Cup win. And this is why when England go into a tournament and we know who 9 of the starters are going to be, probably 10 of the starters are going to be, and Southgate is unwilling to make changes regardless of results, this is why England falls short. Now, Lee Carsley, I think, is going to take a different approach. I think others have taken different approaches. I think you saw it with Spain as well in the Euros. They made changes as the tournament went along. Not forced changes either. These Argentinian changes weren't forced because the players that dropped out from game one, Leandro Paredes, he came on in the final. Lautaro Martinez, he came on in the final. The only one that didn't is Papu Gomez. The others were not injured. Papu Gomez was not injured. He was fit for the final. He just wasn't picked to play. Didn't come on. So I like this. I like the idea of you put an international break. Let's see what the Premier League schedule was this year. Now. Right. So, season starts 17th of October. So, you would have Premier League games 17th, 25th, 1st, 7th, 14th, 21st, 28th. Then players would go on international break. But rather than going from the 5th to the 20th as they are now, they would have gone from the 29th, basically, the evening of the 28th, morning of the 29th, and they would be coming back on the 13th. So there's your 2 weeks there. So they play 13th, 20th, 27th, 2nd, 9th, and then they would have the second break, which is the break we have now. And then they come back the 24th. But as Phil said, they play 3 games in each break rather than 2 in each break, necessitating only 2 breaks rather than 3. And you put a limit on what how much the players can play. I think the players would be happier. We know FIFPro would be happier. The clubs would definitely be happier. The leagues would be happier. And there's no games being lost. Like UEFA, FIFA, whoever, there's still the same amount of games being played. So the national FAs are not losing out on gate receipts and whatever else. And again, these are not games that matter, especially this year. These are Nations League games. No one cares. I love this idea, Phil. Absolutely love it. So I came into this podcast chipper, and now I can leave it chipper because that's a good idea. I will be back later today with 2 Footed Extra. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.